Hello, hello, and welcome to Temple of the False Pod, where our decks are not optimized, but our plays sure as heck are fun. I'm Andy.
I'm Bruce.
And today we have a new reoccurring episode segment thing where we do a thing we did last season, and we're doing it again, but different this time. Last season we found some black enchantments, and we have since dubbed the episode Temple's Treasures. So welcome to Temple's Treasures, where we pick some cards that we think don't get as much use as they could and should, and tell you about them.
That's right. 15 episodes into the show, we're already rehashing content.
Heck yeah.
Yes!
So, the rules with this segment: we find cards that are in less than 1,000 to 2,000 decks on EDHrec.
Yes.
There's a bit of flexibility there. That's fine. That were printed mainly before 8th edition. We haven't come across any that have been printed since, but who knows?
Well, I have one for this week.
Oh.
That was originally printed pre-8th edition. It has since been reprinted, but it still comes under our 1,000 decks on EDHrec
Nice.
requirement.
I like it.
So, I'm skirting the edge here. Skirting the edge of legality for our made-up requirements.
Yeah. Like I said, last season we found some black enchantments, so we're taking a trip around the color pie, albeit randomly, this season on Temple's Treasures. I'm going to do some red enchantments. Going into this, I thought it was going to be just as easy as it was for black enchantments. But it turns out, red's got a lot of crappy enchantments.
I find that the red enchantments that you would look at and say, ooh, this is a good one. Mm-hmm. Yeah, those are in a lot of decks. So you tend to find cards that give you extra points of damage, enchantments that double your damage, and all this sort of thing. They're great, and they show up in a lot of decks. So it takes a little bit more of a struggle to...
Yeah, there are a lot less
hidden
hidden treasures.
Yeah, a lot less hidden treasures. However, in spite of that, we do have some solid nuggets of gold here. The key to remember with Temple's Treasures is a lot of times the enchantments that we're finding are enchantments that that go really well in some decks.
Yes.
So these are not your soul rings that belong in virtually every deck. These are not your red cards that, why wouldn't I ever put this in every single red deck? These are not those cards. These cards are the cards that should go in every single deck that does X.
Yeah, that's it also. Like, a lot of these cards, most of them, in fact, are going to have better counterparts, which is why these are not as used. But some of those counterparts, or some of these better alternatives, are sometimes expensive. But it was really interesting to dive in, especially in red. Most of my decks are either red or black or some combination of both.
Yeah.
So it was a fun little experiment.
And finally, Andy and I have not seen each other's lists. So we're each going to provide 4 cards. We haven't seen each other's lists, so we may have some overlap. We may not. We'll find out together.
I think that is the perfect, succinct point about all of this, is that we can look at, how many of our cards were made before 8th edition, and come out with 4 separate cards without any overlap. So let's see that magic work. Bruce, I'm going to call on you to bring up your first card.
All right. First card on the list. I'm going with Seal of Fire. It's an enchantment. It costs 1 red mana. It says, sacrifice Seal of Fire. Seal of Fire deals 2 damage to any target. It says target creature or player, but it's any target. Now, the reason this card doesn't show up in most decks is because it's 2 damage. I mean, who cares? If a lightning bolt can't make it into most red decks, why would you want a card that not only doesn't do as much damage as a lightning bolt, but it's sitting there on the battlefield? People are going to see it coming. That's exactly why you play this card, because they can see it coming. You're not playing Seal of Fire so that you can play it, immediately sack it, and do 2 damage to the dome. At least not unless they're at 2 life and you want to finish them. You're playing this card because you want it to sit on the battlefield. You want it up front because you want everybody to know that when your combat phase comes around, or if they are thinking about attacking you, they have to calculate that 2 points of damage into every possible attack and block scenario. That all by itself, never using it, always leaves the threat that it could get used. So, Andy, if you have 3 5/5 creatures,
yes,
and I have 3 3/3 creatures, without the Seal of Fire, you look on the table, ignoring all the rest of it, and I realize that's a big ask. Basically put, if you have 3 5/5s and I have 3 3/3s, you should be able to tap all of them and send them in with virtually no fear. Obviously, I can double block and kill one of them, and you'll only kill one of my 3/3s. But it means you've got 2 other ones that are coming in, so I'm going to either chump with the remainder or take 10, or... Simply put, you have the larger numbers. Add the Seal of Fire into the mix. Suddenly, any one of my 3/3s by itself can take out any one of your creatures. So, 1 3/3, taking out one of your 5/5s, I double block with the other 2, take out another 5/5, and then the third one gets through without damage. Well, you lost 2 5/5 creatures out of your 3 to do 5 damage to me. And in the end, I only lost 2 of my 3/3s. So when you look at the math, you say, okay, well, that's the math. What about the next guy? Well, the next guy, you're not worrying about me doing the 2 damage because you're thinking to yourself, he's going to save that and protect his own butt with it. You know, he's going to add that in to finish off creatures. And if I've got first strike creatures, well, add 2 damage to that, because that really messes up the combat math. That's why this card is so good. The other thing to keep in mind with Seal of Fire is that it is an enchantment. So it costs only 1 red. You can put it into the graveyard at will. You're sacrificing it when you want to. So if you're running it in an enchantment deck, you essentially have, as long as you can get it back out of your graveyard, you've got a loop going with just this 1 card, because it sacks itself to do 2 points of damage, and that's for 1 red. So make it work. You can certainly do that as well. It's a term that's really been sort of forgotten. The whole rattlesnake idea. The idea is the card sits there and it acts as a rattlesnake. You're warning everybody right up front, and it's sitting right there. And that's something a lightning bolt can't do.
And like the other thing with this too is that the damage ability itself is an activated ability. So if it gets down, it's all intents and purposes like used. Like it will generally it's harder to counter compared to a lightning bolt.
Well, exactly.
Lightning bolt, counter it when it comes out if you want. I mean, That's the other thing is somebody going to waste their
Croson grip on this?
Right.
Not a chance. No one's throwing away a Croson grip on this thing because, they're stopping 2 damage? Come on. No, I like this card, and I realize that we are talking about a very niche area. These cards are only good in niche areas. I mean, if your deck is primarily instants and sorceries, then this just isn't going to really cut it. But in the right decks, this is a great card. Something else to consider, this card was initially created pre-Planeswalkers. Now you've got a card sitting on the battlefield that says any Planeswalker with a loyalty of 2 or less can die instantly. That's a completely different scenario when you're talking about Planeswalkers that come in at 3 loyalty or 4 loyalty and are looking at a -2 to be really effective. In other words, it's a 1-use Planeswalker now. So are you willing to pay that much to be able to use that minus ability 1 time, knowing that the guy who's holding Seal of Fire is going to thump your Planeswalker for value? They're just going to, unless it does absolutely nothing to them, they're going to take it out. So
with that card, Seal of Fire, Comes in at 166 dex, according to EDHrec. And we move on to my first card.
Yes.
Which is Raka Sanctuary. 16 dex. 1/6. You'll soon see why. 2 and a red. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you control a white or blue permanent, Raka Sanctuary deals 1 damage to target creature. If you control a white permanent and a blue permanent, Raka Sanctuary deals 3 damage to that creature instead. So, obviously, not going to use it in a mono red deck, but you can. Don't know why you would, but the option's there. You only have value from this if you are running blue or white, or stealing from blue or white. I guess what I'm trying to say is the value I find in this is that you don't have to have both. It doesn't have the color identity of blue or white, so you can run this in an Izzet deck. You can run this in a Boros deck. You can run this in whatever deck has red in it. And you're at the beginning of each turn, you're getting 1 damage off to any target creature, unless you have all 3. If you have blue and white, then you're getting off 3 damage to that creature instead. The great thing is that you can target a different creature each time it does it. And with red having so many, multiplier spells like Furnace of Wrath and such, it adds up, and it's just free damage at the beginning of a turn too. Your turn, but it might discourage someone from blocking something that you have, or it might, plainly, it might kill things a lot of the time. Unfortunately, it's just target creatures, so if there's no creatures on the board, it's kind of useless. If you are the sole proprietor of any creatures on the board, well, your creatures are going to get hurt, but hopefully you're okay with that.
Simply put, obviously, I like this best in a Jeskai deck. Obviously,
yes. Obviously,
but when you're looking at the 3 damage, you can look at it from your attack. It's like, who am I attacking? What is their defenses? Where best to put this 3 damage? Because the instinct is immediately go to something that you can kill for 3. Whatever creature is out there that you can kill, you go for that one. And I get that. I certainly appreciate that. But in the scenario that I used when I was talking about Seal of Fire, if I have 3 5/5 creatures and you have 3 3/3 creatures, you just use it on one of my 5/5s. Now they've already got 3 points of damage on it. Suddenly, a single 3/3 creature can take it out. The odds are I'm not going to block with it because I'm not going to risk losing it. So now you can look at the situation and say, okay, he only has 2 5/5s. How does that factor in when I attack? You can set things up along that route. It's also a way to inflict damage on your opponent's creatures for cards that require there to be damage on other creatures. I'll be fair, a lot of those cards do say combat damage, and this is not combat damage. This is just damage. But I'll take 3. I'll take 3 damage on my upkeep, and it's not as though this is a card that's going to get targeted with removal.
Right. And the other thing too is this is great for something like Boros Reckoner, where when it takes damage, you redirect that damage elsewhere. So if you have multipliers, it'll multiply to the Reckoner and then multiply outward. Yeah. Or something as niche as if you're playing an Enraged deck with those dinosaurs, where it's if it takes damage, X happens. So any of them. So we've got the Ripjaw Raptor, where it's whenever Ripjaw Raptor is dealt damage, draw a card. You just target that. It doesn't kill it. and then you just draw another card. So like there are options on targeting your own things for your own benefit. There's Polyraptor. When Polyraptors deal damage, create a token that's a copy of Polyraptor. So there are very niche uses for this card, and I'm just surprised it doesn't see more play in those niches.
Andy, what was the name of the card you mentioned just earlier? It was the Boros card that redirects the
Boros
damage.
Reckoner?
Right. So, Andy, with Boros Reckoner in mind, let me introduce you to a series of cards from way back when called Encore Creatures. EN, and then the second word is KOR.
Oh.
If you take a look at these ones, these Encore Creatures were from, I think they were mostly from Tempest, but either way, their ability is, for 0, you can redirect 1 damage from Lancer's Encore to a creature you control. You were talking about damage doubling effects?
Mm-hmm.
Well, with any Encore creature, and the Boros Reckoner, and any of the damage doublers you were talking about, you can then bounce the damage back and forth. So you take you take the Raka Sanctuary. It deals, say, 2 damage because you have the Boros, or sorry, it deals 3 damage because you have the Boros Reckoner out. No, 1 damage because you have the Reckoner out because it counts as a white creature.
Right.
Right. So you do 1 damage to the Reckoner. But whenever the Reckoner's dealt damage, it deals that much damage to target creature or player. Okay. Now, you've already got the doubler, so it deals double that much. So you send it over to one of your Encore creatures.
Mm-hmm.
They don't take the damage. They just redirect the damage. So you get your Encore creatures, and you bounce the damage back and forth between them from the Raka Sanctuary until you reach the number that's what you're looking enough to do damage to the creature that you want to kill.
Right.
And then send it back to the Reckoner.
Yeah.
Who then bounces it onto the opponent's creature. Now, yes, your Reckoner dies. I mean, if you're going to go to all this trouble, maybe you're running indestructibility as well on your creatures.
I mean, the great thing with the Reckoner too is that it redirects it to a player as well.
Right. So bounce with a damage doubler out there. 2 Encore creatures. You can bounce forever. So you can bounce until you've got the 80 life, the 100 life the 100 damage that you need to kill a life gaining opponent. Dump it to the Reckoner, who then bounces it over to the opponent's head, and they're dead.
Marvelous.
Now, sure, Raka Sanctuary is a small part of this set, but this is the sort of card that allows you to get things started, that creates that sets off. You want your Rube Goldberg machine to work. Raka Sanctuary is the card that starts everything into motion. Yeah. Fun
and
card.
Honestly, like until you get to that last step, it's just creating value, because it's 3 mana for an enchantment, which is but for every turn that you take that you are dealing a damage, presumably you're directing it where you want it to be, and that's progressing the board states in some way. But yeah, so that's my first card.
Right. My next card is kind of cheating.
Oh, Bruce.
It's not cheating, but it's maybe not the kind of card that I want to play. However,
we had a few of those in the black ones, so it's okay.
I know this is a card that many others would like to play. So I'm just going to throw it out there. It's an enchantment, obviously. This card is called Scald. So for 1 and a red, whenever a player taps an island for mana, Skull deals 1 damage to that player. Now, these are the kind of cards that just don't get printed anymore. Wizards does not like to print cards that targets players of just one that are playing a specific color. There's a handful of reasons for this, because these cards tend to be really good against players playing that color and just completely dead against the ones who aren't. So,
yeah, I mean, in a 60 casual, you have 4 of these. The blue player is just...
The blue player is hosed. However, if there's no blue player, you've got 4 dead cards, because they're dead. This thing does nothing unless somebody has an island. And just remember, a lot of times when we're talking commander, the blue player isn't the blue player. The blue player is the Dimir player, or the Jeskai player, or whoever. So if you've got a dual land, well, maybe it isn't an island. In which case, you don't take the damage for get blue mana. The reason that these cards don't tend to show up in a lot of decks now is people tend to look at these cards and say, yeah, but it's only good if somebody's playing blue. I'm like, all right. Okay, 1. We're playing multiplayer. There are 3 opponents, and we're playing commander. Virtually everybody is playing at least 2 colors. A lot of times they're playing 3. The odds that somebody out there is playing blue is pretty good. We all know that blue is, at the very least, blue is one of the 2 best colors in Commander.
Right.
So even there, we're looking at the odds improving. So I don't believe that this card is ever a dead card. Well, obviously there are times when it is, but realistically, this card is rarely ever a dead card.
Yeah.
If you draw it very late in the game, then it's a dead card, because realistically, unless somebody has stacked up 10 islands, or they've made sure that all of their dual lands are searchable, so they're all named island, so they all have island as a land type, you're just not going to do enough. And on top of that, it is only 1 damage per mana tapped. So the blue player can wait and take the damage and to play their spell. The key here for me is, 1, either the blue player can get rid of this card immediately, or they can't. Those are the 2 options. Because nobody's going to help you. Why would somebody who's has 0 effect from this card get rid of it for you? Now, so that means that, okay, 1, they can get rid of it. Okay, so you say to yourself, well, I'm going to spend 2 mana and they're just going to counter it? Like, yes, because they're burning a counter spell on a 2 mana enchantment that is essentially a throwaway card. That's a wonderful thing. Just remember, they're losing that counter spell. That one is done.
It's the use of resources, regardless of it.
Exactly, and it's costing you only 1 and 1 red mana to make that happen. So that by itself is valuable, because this is a card that the blue mage is going to counter. I mean, especially as you get earlier into the game, when they're forced to tap out, meaning they have to tap those islands, their spells start to hurt. When you're taking 3 points of damage just to play a spell, it hurts. So they'll either counter it or they won't. And if they don't, one damage per island every time they tap it, I mean, the numbers can become significant. Now, realistically, the numbers are never going to become significant, because odds are there's 2 blue players. They're both going to want it gone. One of them is going to get rid of it as fast as possible. And they're not just going to bounce it back to your hand. They're going to get rid of this card. You will not get repeated opportunities to play this. But it makes them get rid of this card. This is not an option card, like, well, maybe I'll just let it slide. No. It's got to go. And forcing a blue player's hand, forcing them to immediately react to this spell, is exactly what they don't want to do. I love the benefit of that. So play it to your meta. If your meta suggests that you shouldn't do this, then fine. But I would suggest that there are plenty of blue decks floating around. This card is not going to be a dead card in your hand very often.
So, Scald.
Yep.
One in a red. EDHrec has it at 69 decks. Nice.
There we go.
Up next, I have... Ooh, this one I couldn't make heads or tails of. And I almost thought I should put it first, but I thought it was a little better than Raka Sanctuary. It's 2 in a red. It's called Rivalry. Shows up in 125 decks. It says, during each player's upkeep, if that player controls more lands than any other, Rivalry deals 2 damage to them. So what this means to me is that it's going to do 2 damage to at least one player every round the table. At least. Because there's going to be one person who has more land than the other. Granted, if that's you, it's going to deal you 2 damage. But if it's not you, if it's the green player, it's going to do them 2 damage directly to their face at the beginning of each of their turns. So it's either going to have them slow down on playing lands until everybody catches up, in which then it does damage to somebody else.
Now, just jumping in real quick.
Yeah.
If 2 players have the same amount of land, then this doesn't do damage to either one of them.
Well,
so,
I didn't think of that.
Well, no. But essentially, the idea behind Rivalry is, honestly, this card is as miserable to one color as Scald is. This thing targets green decks. Don't even suggest that it's doing anything else. We all know that when a green deck gets played, in the first 5 turns, they're going to find ways to ramp. They're going to have way more lands than anybody else. The only benefit for the green player when it comes to Rivalry is it's likely there's more than one green player. But even then, once the numbers start getting a little higher, it gets a lot harder to match up your land count just to avoid 2 damage. Players just aren't going to do that. They're not going to restrict. It's like, oh, I could play another land? Yeah, oh, I'm going to do it. Because they'll take the 2 damage. Because they're just like, hey, an extra land. If I have to take 2 damage this time, I will.
What I like about this is that it slows down the green player. And on top of it, obviously you get that damage every round, if applicable. But
what I like about it is it targets the green player, and it's one of those. Remember when you were much younger and your sibling would reach around behind you and just flick the back of your head?
Yeah.
Flick the back of your head. You know that? Bang. Annoying, but rarely ever annoying enough that you get up and pound on them. Because it's just like, ugh, stop it! That's Rivalry.
Yeah. 2
points of damage? 2 points of damage. Whatever. And it's not like you did it. It's like, look, I knew that I wasn't going to be the one who had the most land, so I thought I would take a shot.
Yeah, stop hitting yourself.
Right. This is your fault. You can stop it any time you want. Now, the question then becomes, how long is that green player going to put up with this? We're repeating the same questions that we talked about for Scald. Because the green player has plenty of access to enchantment removal. They can... And we already know they've got mana. So they can get rid of this anytime they want.
And it'll be much less of a pain for them, too.
Right. It just...
Than it would be for Scald.
I can tell you, as somebody who has played green decks in their life, I don't know that I want to burn my Naturalize, my, any one of the I don't know, 10 ways that I've put in my deck to deal with enchantments. Do I really want to burn one of those on a rivalry? You know, the games we have heard that games run approximately 10 turns. If you don't play rivalry, if you play rivalry right on the curve, on turn 3, bang, you drop it, and it's good for until turn 10. Well, it means every other player is going to face this rivalry 7 times. At most, if one player gets dinged every single time, they're looking at 14 damage. Now, that's significant enough that if they have a way to get rid of it, they will. However, man, it is so hard to throw away a piece of enchantment removal on a card like Rivalry when you could be saving it for any one of hundreds of other options. There are so many other enchantments that are just so much better to get rid of. Aren't you better off taking 2 points of damage every turn than letting the guy with Phyrexian Arena draw the extra card? What about the doubling season that the other guy has? What about the red player who's got a way to double damage? You can go through a laundry list, and all of you at home can think of all of the games you've ever played and think of enchantments that you would rather see dead than this one.
I think for me, kind of my like closing remarks on this card is that I really like the design space of it. There's so much of just like everything that's going on is, all right, I'm going to wait to attack. I'm going to keep up my blockers. I'm going to, go for the value plays. So it does that by having other people slow down their mana production, but it also keeps the game going by creating a long clock, but still a clock. It keeps the board state from getting too stale, but it also addresses when people stop attacking each other. Somebody's still losing life. Right. And I like it.
Right. One other thing.
Yeah.
When I mentioned the idea that it would do 14 damage if you played it directly on curve, that's cute. 14 damage. That's not going to happen, but it's there.
Yeah.
Think about it when you play it in the late game. When that green player's down under 10 life. Suddenly, this thing becomes something they have to deal with.
Yeah.
Because they
huge percentage marks.
They know they're the ones who are getting dinged every single upkeep. And sure, maybe it's only going to be 2 more upkeeps. Maybe it's only going to be 4 more damage. But 4 more damage on top of the tiny life total they're already at, suddenly they're within range of just about any creature smacking them over the head and finishing them. It is a good card. I mean, you're not, you would be well served to keep it in mind.
Yeah.
So,
all right. Number 3 in not any particular order. What do you got, Bruce?
This was one that I didn't have to go back into the Wayback Machine to find. Because actually, my friend Andrew is playing this in a new deck that he's working on. This was recommended to him by Brian David Marshall. I looked at this card and thought to myself, I've never even heard of this card. How have I never heard of this card? This is ridiculous. The card is Invasion Plans. Invasion Plans is 2 and a red mana, so it only costs 3. And it says, each creature blocks whenever able.
Huh.
Attacking player chooses how each creature blocks. So, if I swing in with, I don't know, 8 saplings, all of your creatures will now block 1 of those saplings because they must all block.
Yeah.
And my remaining 7 saplings, irrelevant of how big they are going to get through and do that much damage. You can do this. So Invasion Plans obviously works well in a tokens deck because it's going to let you swing in a ton. It's also it also allows for all sorts of other shenanigans as far as how the blocking is set up, how things work. Now, the reason this card doesn't get played a ton is because, like a lot of the old cards, you don't get all the benefit. Everybody gets the benefit. So now your opponents can choose to swing back at you. And now they're the attacking player, and they choose how you block. It can get very messy. It's much like a lot of the damage doublers. You hope that you are playing with the awareness that the damage doublers are out there. In this case, you are playing with the awareness that essentially the creatures are now unblockable. Obviously, this doesn't play well, or this is wonderful when your opponent is running a Voltron deck, because all of your creatures have to block. They block that one creature. So, but you're keeping this in mind. So, all creatures have to block? I think I might start playing some Death Touch. And this works really well when you're trying to hit multiple opponents at once, because you can spread your creatures out. You pick one to block and go from there. This is also delightful when your opponents have utility creatures, and you just want those dead. So it's like, okay, that one is blocking my big guy. The rest of them are blocking this 1/1, and the remaining creatures all get through. Or maybe none of your creatures get through. Maybe you're not looking to ramp up the damage with combat. You just want to get rid of some of the utility creatures that are on the board. This is an easy way to do that. I love Invasion Plans. This is a brand new card for me. The dollar value on it is very low, and this is also one of those cards that just says, okay, this game is ending. We're going to end this fast because everybody gets this benefit. So combat, it stops being about how many you can block and how many he can block, and it starts being all about, okay, we're thundering over, we're sending the works, and we're just going to start plowing into each other. Because
I think
if you don't take advantage of it,
I think this deck works really well in those decks, this card works really well in those decks where you want to attack, but like you said, they're going to come back at you. But I guess a way to get around that detriment, just don't give those creatures vigilance.
Well, exactly. Yes, if you know this is the case, then give your creatures vigilance. I mean, vigilance has always been a strong ability.
Oh, I mean, like,
Commander.
don't give them vigilance, so that
so they don't have to block.
They can't block. Yeah.
Right. Well, again, if you're putting this in your deck, you are running under the assumption that you can just do way more damage than your opponents can.
Yeah.
And you're prepared to take damage to make that happen. So if I'm swinging in with my creatures and I think I can do about 20 damage, but I don't think you can manage to do 20 back, that's why you're doing it.
Yeah.
Now, I wouldn't want 3 opponents ganging up on me, but play it at the right time, in the right way. Right.
You're choosing when to play it.
Exactly. You are the one choosing this. Optimize it and go.
So with 3 cards under your belt, 2 under mine, we're going to quickly jump to break. We're going to throw it over to our sponsors for a quick ad. Be right back. This episode of Temple of the False Spot is brought to you by Braid of Fire Hair Salon and Grill. Come on, get your hair did and your grub on. The longer you stay, the better it is. When you're here, you're Braid of Fire Hair Salon and Grill. And now back to you. All right. Welcome back, Bruce.
Hey.
WBB. Welcome back, Bruce.
Yep.
Let's roll right into my third card. Coming in at Invasion Plans, for those keeping track. 353 decks. My third card coming in at 1 red mana. It's called Mark of Fury. It's in 204 decks, according to EDHrec. It says, enchanted creature gains haste. At the end of turn, return Mark of Fury to its owner's hand. So, it quite literally replaces itself as long as it resolves. And as long as the creature doesn't die. And it gives whatever creature haste. It's pretty sweet. I don't know much more to say about it. It's repeatable, which is great. Once you play it one time, people will expect it. But as long as your creature doesn't die by the end of turn, you're not going to have any issues. I guess the biggest downside, at least that I can see, is if you weren't planning on activating its ability on your turn, it's not going to have haste on everyone else's turn. So if you were planning on using it on your turn, great. Red has some pretty great creatures, some pretty big creatures that get in for a lot of damage. So if you have any reason to give anything haste, Mark of Fury should be a pretty easy include, especially at 1 red mana and it being repeatable.
To me, the key with this one is, first off, the limitation. Only one, if you're playing 2 creatures out in a turn, only one of them's getting haste.
Right.
Fine. Realistically, you're playing this. If you're running this, you're not running this because you've got 5 goblins you're going to play out this turn, and you want one of them to have haste. You're not doing that. If that's what you're looking for, then you will find other cards to give all of your creatures haste that cost a lot more than just 1 red mana. You're playing this because you've got dragons, because you've got a large creature that you're dropping on the battlefield, and you know what? 1 more red mana to let it swing 1 turn earlier and come in and hit that much harder with surprise, it's going to happen.
Yeah.
The joy here is you play your dragon. Big old 5/5, does something nasty when it comes into play. Okay. Did it resolve? Because one, either it didn't resolve because, the blue player said no, or someone has looked at this and, or somebody else looked at it and said, no, we can't have that happening. Fine. Then you follow it up with a Mark of Fury. Because if the creature is still there, then somebody who could have got rid of it would have got rid of it.
Yeah.
If they were going to target it as it came into play, they would have done so. So when you play Mark of Fury, no one's going to counter it because they would have countered the spell in the first place. And if they didn't, and now they're countering the Mark of Fury, well, okay, so they're saving themselves from an attack that turn, but not the attack the next turn. So that doesn't make a lot of sense. What happens with the Mark of Fury when you play it is then you've got an opponent who's holding removal and is thinking to themselves, okay, now I'm going to get a 2-for-1 because they're also going to stop you from ever getting haste again because they're going to kill that creature before the end of the turn. That's where the downside sits on this card.
Right.
But practically speaking, most of the time when you're using this card as an enchantment, you're looking at the rest of the board. You're picking who your opponent is, and then you're looking at the rest of the board saying, yeah, okay, Johnny, you're going to pay the price. And then you play it. Because you don't want anybody else taking out your creature. It's like, oh yeah, I'm going to get 2-for-1. Like, yeah, great, but I was about to hit this guy, let me at least get that done. This isn't to say they're not still going to take out the creature after that turn, but that's the benefit for this one, is that it forces you and your opponents to play a little more strategically, to understand exactly when is the right time to go after this stuff, when isn't it. And honestly, I'm not even sure that I would use Mask of Fury every single turn. There are times when I'm not going to play it, or Mark of Fury. I'm not even sure that there are times when I'm going to use this for each creature that comes down.
Yeah.
There are plenty of times when I'm going to be like, no, you know what? I'm going to play this creature right now. I don't have a red mana to spare, but I'm okay with it just sitting there for a turn because I need a blocker. Because I want my opponents to just deal with this. Because I got something coming up the next turn, and if he's still out there, this is going to be good. Or I can draw attention away from him by playing this card before they go out. I like that. I like the flexibility that it offers, and it forces it puts another level of strategy onto the board state. Don't forget, haste isn't just you get to swing with your creatures. Haste is you get to tap your creatures for their ability right away. This is wonderful when you're pairing it with a commander who comes out. You put the card on. You put this card on it, and you can activate it right away because especially with a lot of the newer commanders, these cards are designed with the expectation that they're not going to get tapped until they've been in play for a full turn rotation. So.
Yeah, this is like a great this would be a great include in my Hidetsugu deck. I know Hidetsugu's not exactly new, but I mean, I think as many haste enablers in that deck.
Sure.
Especially for 1 mana. I think, granted with that deck, you need as many haste enablers because people are going to try to stop them. But in most instances, how many people are going to try to stop a 1 mana haste enabler with a counter, or even, I guess with removal, but definitely not enchantment removal.
Right.
Straight up creature removal. But I don't know. For 1 mana, it's kind of worth it.
Yeah.
So we said 4, right?
We said 4.
Onto your final card.
The last one.
The last one.
The last one of my bunch. This is one I picked immediately. As soon as we said Red Enchantments, I said, ooh, this is going to make it. And I put it on my list, and I went through, and not only was it make it, it is number 1 on my list. There is no doubt. Not only that...
Bruce, you're making me nervous that it's going to be mine, too.
Not only that, this card really works when you start looking at the decks in Kaldheim. When you start seeing the commanders that are going to be coming out of this, and the kind of decks that the set is encouraging.
Not to date this episode, but...
Not to date this episode. It is a 4-mana enchantment. It costs 2 and a red and a red. And it was originally printed in Homelands. Yes, that's right. I found a card in Homelands that I think is amazing. It is
definitely not the same card I have for number 1.
It is Anzerin Ruins. That's A-N-Zerin, Z-E-R-R-I-N, Ruins. The art alone is reason enough to look this card up. It's by Dennis Detwiller. Essentially a bunch of strange boxes with lots of faces on them. It's very bizarre. I'm not really even sure how that ties in. Okay. What does it do? As Anzerin Ruins enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. Creatures of the chosen type don't untap during their controller's untap step. So, okay. For Kaldheim?
Lots of changelings, Bruce.
Lots of changelings. In other words, pick any creature type and all these creatures stay tapped until they get rid of this enchantment.
Is Bruce a creature type?
Bruce is not a creature type. Not yet. However, you now get to pick any opponent. So look at the opponents that you're playing in this game and say to yourself, what creature type do I want tapped? Are you sick and tired of the wizards constantly tapping and doing all kinds of crap? This shuts it down. Does the volume of humans in your deck, in the decks that you're playing against, drive you crazy? Locked it down. This card, the reason this card doesn't get played as much is because everybody seems to think, oh, we're playing Commander, and my group doesn't play very many theme decks. And even when we play theme decks, there's saprolings, or there's some wimpy creature type that just doesn't cut it. Okay, this card works in shutdown mode against somebody playing a theme deck. How does it?
Very rude.
It is very rude. But how does it work when you're playing against opponents where none of them are playing a theme deck? Okay, well, pick the best creature on the board. It now never untaps. Now, this is 4 mana for that ability, so that's kind of pricey. But it's in red. It is soft removal. Once they're tapped, they're tapped. So you can't tap it to crew. You can't tap it to use its tap ability. You can't attack with it. You can't block with it once it's tapped. Just keep all that.
You need to
keep all that.
You need to either have a way to untap it, or it is essentially useless because it's not even in the graveyard to get it back out.
Right. I mean, at worst, we're talking about a pacifism effect.
Right.
At best, it's a pacifism effect for multiple creatures. Remember, we're not naming a creature, we're naming a creature type. This is a great card, and don't kid yourself, I run this in a lot of decks, not just every once in a while. And honestly, if you're pairing it with blue, if you're pairing it with a way to flicker it, great. Well, now you definitely don't need to worry about the guy playing the theme deck, because you can play it and then just play it to block down one creature, and when that creature is no longer an issue, you can flicker it and have it come back down and stuff a different creature. So, like I said, at worst, it's stopping the best creature on the battlefield from doing anything. So you can pick on one player, limit their big ugly creature, and move on from there. This is part of the reason I love this card so much. And it comes out of nowhere. Nobody sees this coming. Nobody.
Why would they?
Exactly. And I'm saying, with Call Time coming in, we are going to see more theme decks. You are going to see more of these theme decks with creature types that have very few creatures of that type, because we're seeing all of these changelings. We're going to see a significant uptick in the number of theme decks.
Like tribal stuff.
Exactly. All kinds of tribal stuff is going to come in, and this is one of the ways to shut it down.
Yeah. So. I think even as far back as Commander Legends, so far ancient history, there were a number of tribes that were kind of starting to become more. Yeah. I mean, obviously elves, also coming back in Kaldheim, already a good tribe, just getting better. Right. Pirates, etc. Spirits. Mm-hmm. And so, I'm always one for making tribal decks because they're kind of easy to put together. And they're easy to suss out some good flavors and good
right.
To make it more thematically encompassing. Which brings me to my last card,
Final card.
Actually goes well with your card.
All right.
More or less. My card. Oh, so for those keeping track, Anzarin Runes, 56 decks.
56 decks. That is a crime, people. A crime. This card belongs in far more than 56 decks. It should be in at least 156 decks. At least that many.
At least. My card comes in at 76 decks. Oof. Again, it's another 1 red mana enchantment.
Oh boy.
A single red mana. Named Onslaught from Exodus. It says whenever you let me read the errated text. Whenever you cast a creature spell, tap target creature. I say let me read the errated text because the card printed says whenever you successfully cast a creature spell, tap target creature. So, errated doesn't have to be successful. As soon as you cast the spell, this goes on the stack. Your creature could be countered, but your tapping still happens. If you have a lot of creatures in your red deck, which tends to happen, a lot of small creatures, sure, but if you have a lot of creatures, this does wonders because you'll tap down your opponent and get right through. If you have a lot of flash creatures, I guess if you're playing like Is It type decks, if you have a lot of flash creatures, you tap a lot of stuff down on other people's turns so they can't attack.
Just this card Onslaught is particularly nice in multiplayer games. There'll be plenty of games where you play a spell, where you play a creature that doesn't have haste. So you play the creature, you tap target creature, you can't attack. Then that person takes their turn, untaps that creature. The net result was you just annoyed them a little, but nothing happened. In multiplayer, though, you play a creature. The person who just played before you, you tap one of their creatures. Now they don't have that blocker for the next the next two players who are going to swing in. Now, admittedly, maybe your guy doesn't have haste, so you can't actually do the damage, but you're creating holes in their defenses to allow other players to come in.
So, like, obviously, token strategies don't work well with this. It's uncast rather than any enter the battlefield. But and even if it's not, multiplayer, like if it's just down to even if it's late game, down to 1-on-1, and they have a board full of stuff, your object isn't to tap all of their things. If you can, great. But it's to start with the biggest things, the worst threats on the board, tap them down, get your infantry through. It's to get as much through as you can, rather than to get all of it through. Like I said, if you have enough creatures to play to make sure that everything they have is down, wonderful, great. This card did amazing things. If it's just to tap down their biggest stuff, as we were talking about with my last card, there's dragons. You have dragons already out. You play like a 1/1 or something. You tap down their flyers. You get through with those dragons. It does wonders. Because you get to choose. The fact that you get to choose what gets tapped is... It
is amazing how many times a player's defenses revolve around a single creature. Maybe they've got 7 creatures on the battlefield, but only one of them has reach. Maybe they've got 2 flyers, but it turns out they need both of them to effectively block. So maybe even then, they'll still have 1 flyer to block your guy, but you know what? On the next turn, now they have none. So, suddenly they think twice about whether or not they actually want to block your creature. Because next time they may need it for a different opponent who has a bigger creature.
Yeah. So that's our 8 cards for this week's episode of Temple's Treasures, Red Enchantment Edition. We've got another half season ahead of you that is going to be so sweet, and we just want to thank you for tuning in, for all your support. If you can, head over to Apple Podcasts, leave us a review. It does us wonders, and it lets us know what you like about our show. If you don't, still, thank you so much for listening. We are the Temple of the False Pod, where our decks aren't optimized, but our plays sure as heck are fun. I'm Andy.
I'm Bruce.
And feel free to reach out to us either on Twitter, we are falsepodmtg, or via email at falsepodmtg@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. about some of your favorite Red Enchantments, whether they are well-known or very secret treasures that we've happened to miss here in this hour-long spectacular. So thank you again for listening.
May your fifth land always be the temple.
Have a great night.
Bye.
Hey everyone, Andy here. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Temple of the False Pod. Just a few housekeeping things here at the end of the show. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, pretty much wherever you can find podcasts. Subscribe and give us a review. It really helps out the show. And it'll show us what you like about our podcast. Also, we've got a Twitter and an Instagram. Our handle is falsepodmtg, all one word. So be sure to follow us. Feel free to reach out to us there or drop us an email at falsepodmtg@gmail.com and tell us your favorite magic-related story. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you again to you and to Bruce. He's Mana Burned on Twitter, and I'm Andy Weekend on Twitter and Twitch. We're Temple of the False Pod, where our decks aren't optimized, but our plays sure as heck are fun. Have a great night, and may your fifth land be the temple.